The ballroom looked like money had been poured into it by the gallon. Gold-trimmed drapes lined the walls, chandeliers sparkled like frozen lightning, and champagne flowed in glasses too fragile to hold without fear. The company spared no expense when charm was required. Investors loved spectacle, and the CEO, Leonard Wexler, knew it. He thrived in applause more than in spreadsheets. He didn't understand half the numbers we generated every quarter, but he understood ego and access, and tonight was his stage. A jazz quartet played near the bar, punctuating every clink of glass with a velvet saxophone note. The ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and ambition disguised as generosity. Wexler tapped his crystal glass and requested silence. The lights dimmed until the chandeliers glowed like halos. He stood in the center, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed every person in the room existed for his convenience. The smile widened as he announced a special entertainment segment, a charity auction. I applauded politely, assuming the usual: vacations, signed memorabilia, maybe a golf weekend. I'd seen this script before. Executives fawned over each other for tax-deductible admiration. But then, something shifted. The stage lights aimed at a side door, and Vanessa Wexler, his daughter, entered as if the event were her coronation. She wore sequins and entitlement. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks, each step announcing a sentence no one dared interrupt. She waved dramatically, reveling in attention like oxygen. Vanessa was notorious inside the company. Technically employed, practically idle. She used her title, Chief Innovation Liaison, to stroll between departments, offering unasked for opinions about projects she didn't understand. Rumors suggested she planned to launch her own tech brand, with company funds serving as her invisible piggy bank. Her friends called her visionary. Employees called her something else. None of those names were flattering. She positioned herself at the podium and cleared her throat with theatrical flair. Then she said the words that changed my life. Tonight's auction includes more than objects. It includes talent. Laughter flickered. I assumed she meant consultants or mentoring sessions. But the grin she flashed had mischief carved into it. She scanned the room like a predator looking for something or someone. Then her gaze fixed on me. She raised her arm, pointed directly at my table, and declared, "Let's start with him." My lungs emptied. For a moment, I thought she was joking, some reckless attempt at humor. But she doubled down, describing me as part of a talent package available for hire, task, or personal service. She didn't stumble over the words. She delivered them like she had rehearsed. The room exploded into laughter. Phones lifted. Camera flashes burst like tiny explosions. Even some colleagues, who later pretended outrage, smiled behind their glasses. My dignity evaporated under those lights. I wasn't a volunteer. I wasn't informed. I hadn't consented to be the entertainment. I was a senior systems engineer, the backbone of the company's digital infrastructure, the invisible talent who ensured servers never slept, who prevented cyber attacks, who carried institutional memory no higher-up bothered to understand. And yet, here I was, treated like an auction item, a piece of equipment, a toy for amusement. Vanessa strutted toward me, heels hitting the stage like gunshots. She leaned close enough for me to smell the arrogance in her perfume and whispered, "Relax, you're lucky I chose you." Her tone wasn't flirtatious. It was imperial. She genuinely believed she bestowed honor upon me. I looked around. I expected someone to object. A board member. The CEO. Anyone with a shred of decency. But no one moved. They didn't see a violation. They saw entertainment. They saw a harmless moment that wouldn't appear in any compliance report. They saw a man too quiet, too professional, too non-threatening to do anything but smile and endure it. They misread silence for weakness. Vanessa lifted her hand again, shouting, "Who wants a private engineer for a weekend consulting package?" She didn't understand that my position wasn't about fixing printers. My clearance level allowed access to confidential systems, vendor relationships, financial backbones, and authentication keys. I held the skeleton of the enterprise in my head. Firing me without a replacement would have been corporate suicide. Auctioning me was something worse. It was disrespect sharpened into spectacle. The bids began. Investors laughed as they raised paddles. 10,000. 20. 30. Not because they needed my skills, but because Vanessa made me a punchline. One executive joked about needing someone to debug his home theater. Another laughed about renaming his Wi-Fi. People who had once asked me for favors with polite emails now treated me like a hired clown. My face felt stiff. I wasn't angry. Anger would have given them power. What I felt was something colder, quieter, far more durable. Clarity. They had revealed their belief about me. I wasn't respected. I was tolerated. I was useful, but disposable. That kind of revelation doesn't bruise, it transforms. Vanessa eventually awarded the winning bid to a venture capitalist who had never once greeted me in the hallway. He shook my hand with the arrogant grip of someone who thinks skin is another surface to acquire. Vanessa clapped as if she had accomplished something meaningful. She didn't realize she had just placed herself on a collision path with consequences she couldn't outbid. As applause died, she sauntered off stage, leaving me standing before people who now viewed me differently. They didn't see an engineer anymore. They saw property. The mental shift was immediate. It wasn't about ego, it was about survival. If they didn't consider me human professionally, what would stop them from treating me as expendable strategically? I sat down, pretending to smile, while my mind processed every variable. The servers I maintained. The contracts I negotiated. The compliance reports I signed. The proprietary systems only I understood. My responsibilities weren't tasks, they were leverage. Vanessa didn't know she had just tampered with a system she couldn't comprehend. She believed power came from inheritance and applause. But in companies like ours, real power lived elsewhere. It lived in code, in access logs, in the architecture behind glossy presentations. I didn't control titles, I controlled truth. And truth keeps receipts. When the CEO returned to the microphone, he toasted the spectacle. Investors cheered. The band resumed playing. Everyone moved on, unaware that something irreversible had happened, not in the ballroom, but inside me. For the first time, I saw the company without illusions. I saw the fragile egos directing decisions they barely understood. I saw the future they assumed I would help build. And I realized something fundamental. They believed they owned me. They didn't know that the most dangerous person in a system isn't the loudest. It's the one who understands how every part connects and what happens when a critical piece quietly withdraws support. Auctioning me wasn't humiliation. It was ignition. And they hadn't even smelled the smoke yet. Vanessa Wexler wasn't just the CEO's daughter. Inside the company walls, she functioned like royalty without a crown, untouched, unquestioned, and immune to accountability. People whispered her name with a mixture of envy and fear because she had something no one else possessed, inherited power without earned competence. In meetings, she arrived late, left early, interrupted others mid-sentence, and dismissed decades of expertise with a shrug. She didn't carry authority. She floated on it, like someone born at the top of a staircase no one else was allowed to climb. Her office was a monument to her entitlement. A corner suite larger than most apartments, covered in white marble, lined with designer furniture, and featuring a skyline view that outshone every other executive floor. On her desk sat a laptop she barely understood how to operate, yet claimed contained the future of digital culture. Employees joked she had never opened half the software on her computer. That wasn't far from the truth. She preferred aesthetics to utilities, objects that looked impressive rather than tools that created substance. If a task didn't boost her ego, she ignored it. Executives tolerated her because she represented the heir to the empire. A few board members privately complained about her expenses, but no one dared confront her. She burned through company credit as if budgets were myths. Luxury retreats disguised as innovation conferences, spa weekends labeled as strategic wellness, and private shopping trips logged under brand development. Her spending habits alone could have created an audit trail long enough to wrap around the building. Most employees assumed she was simply reckless. They were wrong. Vanessa wasn't reckless, she was calculated. Every indulgence was disguised as a business experiment. She didn't ask for permission, she demanded applause. For months, I had watched her from a professional distance. I didn't care about her arrogance. Office royalty is rarely dangerous when ignored. But Vanessa's ambition wasn't content with admiration, it required validation. She wanted a legacy separate from her father's, something flashy enough to shame her critics and silence those who saw her as nothing more than a privileged parasite. Her plan was as bold as it was illegal. She wanted to launch her own tech brand, not outside the company, but inside it, using company resources as her personal incubator. She believed no one would notice if she crafted a digital empire beneath the corporate infrastructure. The idea wasn't subtle. It was obsession. Every spare moment, she sketched logos, met designers in secret, and pitched visions of domination to whoever would listen. Her concept was impressive only in its arrogance, a platform that would revolutionize online identity and social metrics. She promised investors a network where popularity wasn't earned, it was purchased. Her platform didn't measure influence, it manufactured it. Fabrication dressed as innovation. I became aware of her intentions long before she approached me. Not because she confided in me, Vanessa never confided in people she considered beneath her, but because digital footprints don't lie. I maintained the company's back-end systems, and her activity stood out like graffiti on polished glass. Unauthorized logins at odd hours. Gigabytes of data transferred to hidden folders. Prototype code copied from licensed repositories. Her actions were bold enough to trigger automated alerts, but she bypassed them using administrator credentials she had stolen, credentials I recognized as mine. That was the first line she crossed. At first, I did nothing. Silence wasn't compliance, it was reconnaissance. I copied logs, archived her downloads, and traced her access patterns. If she wanted a digital war, she was walking onto a battlefield I had paved. Every keystroke she made was a breadcrumb, and I collected them patiently. But then came the aftermath of the auction night. The morning after I had been sold like a decorative plant, Vanessa summoned me. Her tone wasn't conversational, it was imperial. Her assistant, the human shield she used to avoid responsibility, escorted me to her office. When the door closed, Vanessa didn't offer an apology. She didn't acknowledge the humiliation she caused. Instead, she leaned against her gold-trimmed desk and smiled like someone about to open a present. "I need you," she announced, not as a request, but as a declaration. She handed me a folder filled with screenshots, mock-ups, and a timeline. It wasn't a project. It was a manifesto. Her tech brand was almost ready, she said, but she needed one finishing touch: legitimacy. She wanted me to automate fake user growth, manipulate engagement metrics, forge analytics, and create dashboards investors couldn't question. She believed numbers were malleable. Data, to her, wasn't truth, it was theater. I asked a simple question: why me? She rolled her eyes as if I had asked why the sun rises. "Because you're the only one who understands the system deeply enough to do it without getting caught." She didn't flatter me, she exposed her calculus. Vanessa didn't see my expertise as value. She saw it as a tool belonging to her by birthright. In her mind, she wasn't asking for help, she was exercising authority. She leaned closer and whispered, "Imagine how powerful you'll be once we launch." Don't think small. It wasn't persuasion, it was seduction by ego. She assumed every person dreamed of attaching themselves to her ascent. She didn't understand that credibility can't hitchhike on corruption. I studied the documents. Her platform wasn't a prototype, it was a fraud engine. The fake dashboards weren't decorative, they were weapons. Investors would pour millions into a fantasy, and Vanessa would pocket the applause. If the fraud collapsed, the blame would cascade onto anyone whose fingerprints were near the code. My name would appear first. I told her the system wasn't designed to support such manipulation. That wasn't a lie. It was a warning. She mistook it for shyness and smirked. "Rewrite it," she said. "Don't be dramatic." That was the second line she crossed. The platform wasn't merely unethical, it was dangerous. It exploited data structures that tied into the company's real infrastructure. Bugs in her logic could spill into production environments, corrupting financial reporting systems and compliance frameworks. If she launched her platform using stolen access keys, she wouldn't just sabotage investors, she'd compromise the entire corporation. Still, she believed she was untouchable. Her confidence grew each day. She replaced meetings with secret innovation sessions held in expensive hotels. She sent cryptic messages to marketing teams, hinting at a revolutionary product. She even convinced the design department to draft brand assets without official approval. Every department unknowingly contributed pieces to a machine none of them were allowed to see in full. Vanessa's greatest talent wasn't invention, it was manipulation. Her audacity escalated when she discovered she could bypass procurement policies using her father's digital authorization. She didn't just steal company assets, she weaponized them. She purchased cloud servers under corporate contracts, secured analytics tools using enterprise licenses, and routed all activity through encrypted tunnels. It was a perfect blueprint for plausible deniability, except for one flaw: she underestimated the person who maintained those tunnels. Me. She believed information lived in her laptop. She didn't grasp that networks remember everything. Every file transfer, every credential, every packet of data crossing a server. Systems, unlike people, don't forget. They don't fear authority. They obey logic. And logic was on my side. The auction night had cracked something inside me. Before then, I viewed the company as an imperfect structure worth protecting. After that humiliation, I saw it without illusions. Vanessa wasn't a spoiled heiress with ambition. She was a ticking liability wrapped in glitter. The next phase began when she sent me a private message: "Deadline isn't flexible. Investors expect a preview. Don't disappoint me." Not us. Not the company. Me. Her hubris wasn't subtle anymore, it was radioactive. That was the third line she crossed. She wasn't asking me to build a product. She was dragging me into constructing a crime. Her platform wasn't a business. It was evidence. And she was handing me the matches while standing on gasoline. She didn't realize that the very person she tried to degrade was the one person who could dismantle everything she had built. She auctioned me like equipment. Now she was trying to program me like software. But Vanessa hadn't considered the one rule every engineer knows: you can't control a system unless you understand it. And she didn't understand the storm she had summoned. She thought she owned the company. She didn't know she had just activated its most dangerous alarm: a man with nothing left to tolerate and everything left to expose. People mistake intelligence for power, but in corporate environments, the real currency is access. Power doesn't belong to the smartest person in the room. It belongs to whoever controls the infrastructure everyone else depends on. In our company, that was me. Not because I had a shiny title or charisma that filled conference rooms, but because I had something far more valuable: the keys. Administrator keys. The kind no one else understood, yet everyone unknowingly relied on. Root credentials that unlocked not only servers, but contracts, financial models, archived communications, hidden agreements, and dependency chains the board barely knew existed. I wasn't a technician. I was the gatekeeper. Behind every departmental pride, every executive brag, every investor promise, there was code I had touched, architecture I had designed, and systems that hummed because I allowed them to live. Vanessa didn't understand any of that. To her, I was merely a tool, an inconvenient ingredient required for her plans. She didn't need my mind. She needed my access. My work wasn't a skill set. It was a skeleton key. And she assumed keys obey the hand that holds them. Her mistake wasn't arrogance. It was ignorance. After the night she auctioned me in front of the investors like office furniture with a pulse, she behaved as though I had been purchased. She sent assignments at odd hours, summoned me without warning, and demanded updates with the tone of someone dispatching a servant. The irony didn't escape me. She believed she had humiliated me into submission, but humiliation is a strange catalyst. It transforms quiet professionals into dangerous historians. I didn't raise my voice. I collected data. Vanessa, in her entitlement, believed a project existed only when she declared it. She didn't understand that systems track everything. Every login, every query, every file she touched wrapped itself in metadata she couldn't see. And because I had administrator privileges, I didn't have to guess her intentions, I could read them. Her platform, which she imagined as a digital throne, wasn't being built in secrecy. It was being recorded by machines that didn't recognize nepotism, fear, or hierarchy. They recognized only truth. My job didn't give me information. It gave me evidence. That was the part Vanessa never comprehended. When she demanded I connect her prototype servers to the company's data backbone, I saw the traps she didn't know she had set. She routed test servers using corporate VPN tunnels. She stored confidential datasets in unsecured cloud instances. She forwarded proprietary code through personal email accounts. Each misstep created artifacts, digital fingerprints, impossible to erase without triggering alerts. Her recklessness wasn't accidental. It was habitual. She didn't understand consequences because she had never been forced to face any. I, however, understood consequences intimately. So I built backups. Not because I needed protection, but because one day, someone would request answers. And when they did, truth wouldn't come from speeches. It would come from logs, unbiased, unaltered, and time-stamped. Vanessa's requests came faster as her ambition inflated. She wanted dashboards that mimicked real user activity, though no user had ever interacted with her app. She wanted financial projections embedded with imaginary growth curves. She asked me to build an engine that generated synthetic engagement, likes, comments, purchases from accounts that didn't exist. She wasn't pitching a product. She was packaging deception. What she didn't realize was this: when someone asks you to manipulate a system, the system also tracks who asked. One afternoon, she entered the server room, a space she had no reason to be in. The door locked behind her, more out of design than malice. She looked at the cables, blinking lights, and humming fans with the confusion of someone visiting a foreign country without a map. "Is all of this really necessary?" she asked. I almost laughed. She was standing in the nervous system of the corporation, storage nodes, authentication services, redundancy engines, yet she saw only hardware. She didn't understand that the company didn't run because of strategy charts or motivational speeches. It ran because machines listened to rules written in languages she couldn't pronounce. She pointed to a rack of servers. "These are mine now, right?" I paused. "They belong to the company." She smirked. Same thing. There it was, the entitlement that turned corporate assets into personal toys. I realized in that moment that Vanessa wasn't dangerous because she was bold. She was dangerous because she didn't recognize the boundary between ambition and theft. She left after issuing a string of demands, none of which belonged in a legal project. That night, I documented everything. Every change she wanted in the system. Every unauthorized access attempt. Every copied framework and exported dataset. I created encrypted archives distributed across multiple secure locations. If she expected loyalty, she misunderstood me. I wasn't defending myself, I was preserving the future testimony of a system she was corrupting. My silence became her blind spot. She interpreted my calm behavior as compliance. She believed quiet meant controlled. She assumed the auction night had broken me, when in truth, it had freed me. I no longer cared about keeping appearances. I stopped shielding executives from their own incompetence. I let Vanessa talk. I let her improvise. I let her send emails she assumed would evaporate once deleted. She didn't know deleted doesn't mean erased. Not in my world. Every time she touched company infrastructure, I traced her intentions. Every time she bypassed a policy, I captured the violation. She was building a monument to her ego. I was constructing a dossier. Vanessa wasn't the first executive to underestimate IT, but she was the first to believe embarrassment equaled ownership. She truly believed that because she had auctioned my role publicly, she had purchased my silence privately. She saw no distinction between humiliation and hierarchy. The idea that someone might appear compliant while preparing a counterattack never crossed her mind. She thought she was staging a performance. I knew she was creating a crime. The difference between us was simple. Vanessa believed systems obeyed authority. I knew systems obeyed logic. And logic doesn't bend for bloodlines. Weeks passed, and her demands escalated. She wanted privileged access to customer analytics, third-party contracts, and employee performance metrics, datasets she had no legal grounds to touch. I watched her carve her own digital trail like an amateur arsonist spilling gasoline behind her. She assumed I was lighting matches for her. She didn't realize I was drawing maps for investigators who hadn't yet arrived. Vanessa didn't understand that companies don't fall because of sabotage. They fall because someone assumes they are untouchable. She assumed I was a cog. I was the machinery. She assumed I was invisible. I was the mirror. She assumed silence meant surrender. Silence meant surveillance. There came a moment, a turning point, when she leaned over my desk, tapping the screen as if pointing made commands valid. She said, "You don't realize how lucky you are. When this launches, you'll be part of history." I looked her in the eye and saw the flaw that would undo her. She confused momentum with direction. Her project wasn't moving forward. It was falling forward, tripping over ethics, law, compliance, and reality. And she expected me to catch it not with skill, but with access. She didn't need someone who understood technology. She needed someone who controlled the gate that kept her fantasy alive. "You're not building history," I finally said. "You're manufacturing a collapse." She smiled, assuming it was admiration dressed as criticism. "You think too small," she replied. "I don't collapse. I ascend." That was the moment I understood something crucial. Vanessa didn't fear failure because she didn't believe she was capable of it. Her confidence wasn't built on achievements, it was built on insulation. She had never been denied, never been challenged, never been told she was wrong by someone who didn't later apologize. She believed she owned me. She believed she owned the system. She believed legacy was inevitable. She was wrong on all three. My value wasn't intelligence. It wasn't technical skill. It wasn't experience. It was access. Access is leverage. Leverage is power. And power, real power, doesn't announce itself. It waits. Quietly. Watching. Archiving. Preparing. Vanessa thought she auctioned a man. She didn't realize she awakened an architect. And architects don't smash structures. They redesign foundations until the walls collapse under the weight of their own lies. Her countdown had begun. She just hadn't heard the ticking yet. Vanessa had always acted as though destiny owed her an empire, and the investor pitch she orchestrated was meant to be the coronation of her imagined greatness. The company's atrium had been transformed into a showroom of ambition, a spectacle crafted to overwhelm logic before reason ever entered the room. Rows of velvet chairs faced a colossal LED screen, and a runway-style stage gleamed under spotlights bright enough to erase doubt. It wasn't a presentation, it was theater. The investors arrived in waves, each one escorted by assistants carrying tablets and documents like shields. Some belonged to venture capital firms known for turning small ideas into global storms. Others were private tycoons whose wealth came from decades of carefully calculated risks. They didn't wear the arrogance of new money. They carried the silence of predators accustomed to devouring illusions before they turned expensive. Their arrival changed the air itself. Conversations dropped to whispers. The atmosphere thickened with anticipation. Vanessa stood backstage, rehearsing lines she believed would alter history. Her reflection stared back at her from a mirror framed in gold, and she smiled at it as though she were already immortal. She wore a tailored white suit designed to suggest purity, innovation, and inevitability. That suit was her armor, her identity, her camouflage. She didn't believe investors were coming to evaluate her concept. She believed they had arrived to validate her destiny. When the lights dimmed, her heels clicked confidently across the stage. She stopped in the exact center, inhaled deeply, and smiled as though her presence alone justified the evening's expense. Her voice carried across the hall with a rehearsed balance of enthusiasm and authority. She spoke not of numbers or infrastructure, but of revolutions, paradigms, and futures that would bend at her command. The audience listened, trying to determine if they were witnessing genius or witnessing delusion wrapped in designer ambition. Her slides flashed onto the massive screen, charts showing exponential growth curves, user engagement skyrocketing, potential revenue streams multiplying like miracles. Each graph bent upward like a promise carved into digital stone. She spoke about platform adoption rates, predictive spending patterns, and behavioral engines that would reshape digital influence. None of the executives questioned her confidence. Confidence is easy to display when no one asks for proof. From my seat at the back of the room, I observed everything. I had built the infrastructure behind her lies. I knew how little she understood of the technology she boasted about so freely. Her numbers were not simply optimistic, they were fabricated. She was not describing what existed. She was describing what she wished existed. Still, investors reacted with polite intrigue. They exchanged glances signaling opportunity. To inexperienced entrepreneurs, interest feels like victory. To veterans, it is merely curiosity before dissection. When Vanessa finished her presentation, applause filled the room, not explosive, but respectable. She interpreted it as worship. Experienced investors interpreted it as permission to begin the real test. In this world, applause is not approval. It is the last breath before questions sharpen into knives. The first blade appeared in the form of a single raised hand. The man behind it was in his 60s, wearing a charcoal suit so understated it became a statement. He did not posture, blink excessively, or smile unnecessarily. He was the kind of investor whose silence cost more than others' words. "Your projections are ambitious," he said, voice calm but dissecting. "Before we proceed, I'd like to see real-time analytics. Not simulated data. Actual user engagement." The room shifted. The polite applause dissolved. Eyes narrowed. Spine straightened. The performance was over. The assessment had begun. Vanessa froze for a fraction of a second. It wasn't long enough for amateurs to notice, but professionals read fear the way musicians read sheet music. She forced a smile and nodded quickly, trying to regain her rhythm. "Of course," she replied, a tremor hidden beneath her breath. "Our platform is fully operational. We can demonstrate everything live." Her tone was confident, but her eyes searched desperately for me. She found me. I rose from my seat, not hastily, but with the calm of someone who knew the difference between evidence and performance. Vanessa gestured for me to join her. The spotlight followed my walk to the stage, turning my presence into part of the spectacle she had not intended to share. She leaned closer to me and whispered through clenched teeth, "Click simulation. Don't make this complicated." Her words were not instructions. They were threats disguised as partnership. She believed that intimidation would guarantee obedience. She had forgotten that obedience and silence are not the same thing. I plugged my laptop into the presentation system. The dashboard loaded, displaying 2 buttons at its center, each one a fork in destiny. Simulate real. The existence of both options was something Vanessa had never questioned. She thought simulation mode was a convenient tool for storytelling. She never understood that real mode was the only thing investors cared about. Simulation is fantasy. Real is validation. Investors leaned forward. Their expressions no longer reflected curiosity, they reflected expectation. Vanessa attempted one last whisper, this time more desperate than commanding. "Please." Desperation smells different than confidence. And this room was full of people trained to smell it. Without hesitation, I clicked reel. The dashboard refreshed. The numbers didn't dip, they evaporated. User counts fell from thousands to a number small enough to fit on a birthday invitation. Engagement metrics collapsed into zeros. Growth projections vanished like smoke. Entire categories that Vanessa had described as disruptive and proprietary appeared as placeholders awaiting development. The room grew still, not tense, not confused, not surprised. Still. Stillness is not silence. Stillness is judgment. Vanessa's voice broke through the quiet like a stone through glass. "There must be a server issue." He configured it incorrectly. The man in the charcoal suit didn't raise his voice. He didn't need volume. Authority doesn't shout. Stop. That single word halted her excuses. Power always reveals itself not through force, but through certainty. His gaze shifted to me. "This is real data?" "Yes," I replied, letting the numbers speak for themselves. Live, unfiltered, system level. Another investor leaned forward. Her earrings glinted like weapons. "So the platform is not active?" "It exists," I clarified, "but existence is not functionality." The investors exchanged a look that could have vaporized steel. They weren't angry. They were insulted. Vanessa hadn't failed because her product was incomplete. She had failed because she believed they wouldn't notice. Vanessa took a step toward me, her confidence now replaced by fury. "You're sabotaging me." The man in the charcoal suit chuckled, not with humor, but with recognition. Sabotage requires interference, he said. What we see here is absence. Another investor closed his notebook. We don't fund absence. Those words sealed her fate far more than any accusation could have. Vanessa had tried to sell a future that did not exist, and she had done it in front of people who made fortunes recognizing the difference between competence and costume. The CEO burst into the room moments later, summoned by whispers of disaster. He scanned the screen, his eyes widening as though he were staring into an abyss. His daughter's legacy was not a platform, it was an indictment waiting to happen. Vanessa looked at him with pleading eyes, expecting rescue. But her father saw something he had never seen before, evidence without interpretation. He didn't yell. He didn't defend her. He didn't speak. That silence was her sentence. Vanessa left the stage without dignity or direction. Every step she took sounded like a door closing behind her. Each heel strike echoed the end of a name she once believed untouchable. I didn't move. I didn't celebrate. I didn't claim victory. I simply understood something. She hadn't fallen. She had been measured. And reality had found her weightless. In corporate mythology, ambition creates momentum. But momentum without truth isn't innovation. It's fraud with better lighting. Vanessa confused applause for legitimacy. The investors corrected her mistake. They didn't smell failure. They smelled lies. And lies rot fastest under fluorescent light. The boardroom had always been a place of power, polished walnut table, leather chairs, a panoramic view of the city that seemed to bow beneath it. But that morning, the air inside felt different. Not regal. Not strategic. Claustrophobic. A silent tribunal waited behind those walls, and both Vanessa and I had been summoned. There was no agenda attached, no pre-meeting email, no explanation. For people who believed information was power, the absence of it was a statement. Whatever was coming wasn't a conversation. As we walked toward the boardroom, Vanessa tried to recover fragments of her shattered poise. Her heels clicked faster than usual, betraying the panic buried beneath her composure. She muttered under her breath, rehearsing a version of events where she was the visionary betrayed by an ungrateful subordinate. She didn't look at me directly, but her movements radiated hostility, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, fingers twitching as if grasping invisible reins she no longer controlled. The assistant standing by the boardroom door greeted neither of us. She simply opened the door, a gesture that felt less like invitation and more like an executioner pulling a lever. We stepped inside. 12 board members sat around the table, motionless, eyes fixed not on Vanessa, but on the empty chair reserved for her father, Leonard Wexler, the CEO. He had not yet arrived, but his absence wasn't reassuring. It felt tactical, a silence with a pulse. We took our seats. The chair beneath me felt harder than usual. Vanessa crossed her legs, smoothed her suit, and exhaled deeply as if preparing for a performance rather than accountability. Her silence wasn't thoughtful, it was loaded. Moments later, the CEO entered. He didn't sit. He remained standing at the head of the table, clutching a printed document. His voice carried none of the confidence he usually displayed at corporate galas. It was low, cold, procedural. We have a problem. He slid copies of the document across the table. Board members scanned its contents. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes desperate to identify which version of the truth they had discovered. It wasn't the pitch data. It was something far more dangerous, a report generated by the cybersecurity audit team. Unauthorized access logs. Code transfers. Humiliation is not a moment. It is a seed. Once planted, it grows roots in places the offender never sees, nourished quietly by memory, dignity, and time. Vanessa never understood that. To her, humiliation was temporary theater, a spectacle performed, applauded, and forgotten. She believed her auction stunt. The night she turned me into a punchline was entertainment. She assumed laughter was currency, and power was the spotlight she controlled. But the stage she built didn't elevate her. It exposed her. In the days following the investor catastrophe, Vanessa behaved as if she had merely stumbled. She convinced herself the board would forget, that the investors would be distracted by another shiny pitch somewhere else, that her father would smooth everything over as he always had. She underestimated one thing: humiliation rearranges perception. Once people see arrogance fracture, they stop mistaking it for confidence. The first sign of her unraveling came quietly. Her entourage evaporated. The coworkers who once paraded behind her like feathered ornaments vanished one by one. They stopped saving her seats in meetings. They stopped tagging her in congratulatory messages on the internet. They stopped laughing at her jokes. They didn't confront her, they abandoned her, and abandonment is the sharpest teacher of relevance. Without applause, Vanessa didn't know who she was. Her social calendar shrank faster than her credibility. Invitations that once filled her inbox were replaced by silence. The marketing director, who had described her as a game-changing visionary, deleted his public endorsements. The fashion consultant who dressed her for pitches suddenly stopped replying to messages. The event planner who handled her corporate appearances tried to quietly sever ties before her reputation infected his client list. Power, she learned too late, is not permanent. It is borrowed energy. When the lender changes terms, the lights go out. Still, Vanessa didn't connect her social drought to her actions. In her mind, others were jealous, weak, disloyal. She blamed everyone except herself. She insisted that I, a junior nobody in her eyes, had orchestrated some elaborate attack. She didn't realize she had humiliated the wrong kind of person. She targeted someone who understood the system better than she understood her reflection. HR's involvement escalated next. It started with a simple email requesting clarification on administrative anomalies. Vanessa dismissed it. She assumed the department would be neutralized the moment her father intervened. She underestimated how corporate ethics work when reputational damage threatens to metastasize. HR didn't want clarification. They wanted containment. They weren't evaluating her conduct, they were calculating liability. By the time Vanessa finally walked into the HR office, the investigation had grown far beyond unauthorized expenditures. A thick binder sat on the table, its spine stretching from overuse. Her name was not printed on the front. It was embossed. She flipped through the pages, expecting misunderstandings. Instead, she found screenshots, logs, expense reports, email correspondences, call transcripts, and vendor invoices, evidence so meticulous it felt like an autopsy. "Who gave you this?" she asked. The HR director didn't blink. "You did." Vanessa blinked instead. "I don't remember sending these." "You didn't," he replied. "Your system access did." For the first time, Vanessa understood she hadn't been playing with people. She had been playing with infrastructure. Policies don't care about privilege. Logs don't recognize inheritance. Compliance doesn't negotiate with ego. The binder didn't accuse her. It documented her. And documentation always wins. Vanessa tried to argue intent. She claimed innovation required rule bending, that creativity suffocated under bureaucracy. But HR wasn't measuring her artistic ambition. They were measuring legal exposure. Every misstep she took was traceable, and every trace was now evidence. The more she spoke, the deeper the hole became. Her turning point arrived not with a scream, but with a whisper. Her father begged for silence. The CEO, once untouchable, became a man cornered by consequences. He summoned her to his office late one evening, long after most employees had left. The glance he gave her was not paternal. It was exhausted. He asked her to lie low, to stay out of sight, to avoid drawing attention while he handled things. Vanessa mistook his request for strategy. It was surrender. She didn't understand the significance of a CEO begging for silence. Silence is not a request, it is a ransom. And ransoms are taken only when something expensive has been kidnapped, in this case, the company's reputation. But silence was no longer free. Her humiliation had acquired interest. Rumors began to circulate through office corridors like smoke from a fire no one had yet seen. People whispered about fraud, misuse of funds, falsified data, vanished investors, and the board's growing impatience. Colleagues who once envied Vanessa now used her as a cautionary tale. Her name didn't command admiration anymore, it summoned discomfort. The cafeteria changed too. Employees who once stood aside to let her pass now pretended not to see her. She wasn't bullied. She was erased. In corporate environments, disappearance is more lethal than confrontation. When your existence stops influencing decisions, you are not a leader, you are an echo. Her humiliation took a public turn when a video resurfaced, one recorded on the night she auctioned me like a piece of office property. Someone had posted the clip anonymously. In it, Vanessa laughed as I stood under the spotlight, uncomfortable and objectified. She smirked. She called me a talent package, available for tasks like a human accessory. Viewed months ago, the clip might have seemed frivolous. Viewed now, it became radioactive. Executives who once tolerated her behavior now saw not confidence, but cruelty. Investors who once applauded her charm now questioned her ethics. Employees who once shrugged off her behavior now recognized the pattern. She didn't lead. She belittled. Corporate humiliation always follows a pattern. It starts with laughter. Then someone stops laughing. Then someone else remembers. Then everyone questions why they laughed at all. Vanessa had turned me into entertainment in front of cameras. She believed the damage ended that night. She didn't understand humiliation's half-life. It does not disappear. It evolves. The clip circulated internally, then externally. Industry blogs began asking why a senior executive's daughter mocked employees at corporate events. LinkedIn threads dissected her leadership style. Compliance consultants debated organizational accountability. Public relations firms smelled blood. Suddenly, Vanessa wasn't a visionary. She was a liability with a face. Sponsors disappeared next. The companies that once partnered with her father's firm pulled out of deals citing brand risk. A supplier canceled a contract worth millions. A promotional agency refused to renew its engagement. Risk departments don't gamble with scandals, they flee before the ignition point. Vanessa tried salvaging her alliances, calling those who once supported her. She discovered something devastating. No one answers the phone of someone who detonates their own credibility. When she confronted her father about the growing disaster, expecting him to defend her, something in him had changed. He told her the board was considering formal action. His voice cracked, not because he didn't love her, but because he finally understood something she never had. Power without discipline doesn't create leaders. It creates arsonists. That's when her humiliation shifted from professional to existential. She began realizing there was no recovery plan, no comeback speech, no strategic pivot. Her name wasn't tarnished. It was cataloged. Humiliation changes a person when it becomes permanent. It stops being about an incident and becomes about identity. Vanessa had wanted to be unforgettable. She got her wish. Just not the version she imagined. The price she paid wasn't measured in lost deals, missing allies, or disciplinary memos. It was measured in silence, the kind that replaces relevance. Before, she entered rooms and changed conversations. Now, her presence ended them. The woman who mocked an employee to entertain a crowd discovered the last and greatest truth humiliation teaches. When you try to reduce someone to an object, you stop seeing them as a threat. And nothing is more dangerous than someone you underestimate. Vanessa didn't lose power when the board confronted her. She lost it when she confused cruelty with authority. Because humiliation isn't entertainment. It's a contract. Somebody always pays. And Vanessa finally learned the final clause she ignored for too long. The bill doesn't arrive when you humiliate someone. It arrives when they stop being afraid of you. A month can change the entire mythology of a workplace. 30 days earlier, Vanessa had stood in the center of the company's most extravagant ballroom, basking in applause, intoxicated by her own entitlement, and convinced that humiliation was a leadership skill. She believed she was untouchable, ascendant, inevitable. But arrogance always confuses momentum with direction. What Vanessa mistook for ascent was merely acceleration toward a fall she did not see coming. When invitations went out for the next gala, people noticed the sameness first, same venue, same gold-trimmed stage, same chandeliers dripping like frozen raindrops, same crisp linen tablecloths covering tables that whispered secrets of corporate excess. But the similarities ended there. If the previous event had been vanity disguised as charity, this one was a reckoning disguised as ceremony. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. The air held its breath. Employees arrived dressed in their finest, whispering through nervous smiles. Rumors had circulated for weeks: audits, canceled contracts, resignations, sealed board deliberations, closed-door meetings involving lawyers instead of executives. The company had become a ship steering through fog, with the crew desperately pretending they saw land. And at the center of every rumor was the CEO's daughter, the heiress now transformed into hazard. Vanessa did not attend the gala voluntarily. She arrived flanked by her father's assistant and the company's legal counsel. Gone was the blazing confidence that once illuminated her presence. Her steps were slow, her shoulders rigid, her gaze hollow. She looked like someone who had read a verdict that had not yet been spoken. Her white suit had been replaced by a muted gray dress that swallowed her arrogance the way bankruptcy swallows entitlement. People didn't scatter when she entered. They observed. Observations are quieter than accusations, yet infinitely more lethal. The ballroom lights flickered, and the CEO approached the microphone. He looked older, as if months of defending his daughter had aged him by years. He was no longer the man who toasted his empire. He was a father forced to choose between legacy and loyalty, and he was discovering too late that one cannot protect both. He cleared his throat, but the room was already silent. Tonight, he began, we confront something difficult. His voice trembled not from fear, but exhaustion. He did not speak as a leader. He spoke as a man burying dreams. An internal investigation has revealed extensive misconduct, unauthorized expenditures, misuse of proprietary systems, and actions taken without board approval. Vanessa lowered her head as though gravity had finally acknowledged her existence. These actions, he continued, were conducted under the belief that legacy grants immunity. It does not. Our values are not inherited. They are earned. Employees did not cheer. Justice rarely brings celebration. It brings confirmation. The CEO signaled to the technicians. The massive auction board, once used to parade employees as corporate entertainment, lit up. Last time, Vanessa had introduced me as an object. Tonight, she faced the mirror she crafted. Her name rose slowly on the screen, each letter appearing like a judicial stamp. Vanessa Wexler, assets for sale gasps rippled through the room. Even those who despised her cruelty hadn't expected poetic symmetry of this magnitude. The CEO stepped aside as an assistant brought forward a clipboard, the same clipboard once used to mock employees. But tonight, something had changed. The comedy had evaporated. Silent accountability replaced it. For those who invested personal funds, resources, and time into ventures associated with Miss Wexler, he announced, we are legally required to liquidate her personal business properties to compensate corporate losses. He paused, letting the truth settle like dust in an abandoned room. Her startup has been seized. Her accounts have been frozen. Her role has been terminated. Those words didn't echo. They detonated. Vanessa staggered slightly. Someone might have reached out to study her once upon a time, but tonight no such hands existed. Betrayal is personal. Accountability is public. On the screen, line items appeared beneath her name: company vehicle, BMW X7 cryptocurrency wallet, personal office lease, patent submission rights, unlaunched product branding, marketing expenditures. Each asset glowed like an obituary for ambition. The CEO continued reading as though each phrase drained life from his voice. These items will be auctioned to offset damages incurred by her unauthorized use of company funds. Where Vanessa once laughed at my discomfort, she now stood in the same spotlight with no allies, no audience, and no applause. A paddle was placed beside the clipboard. No one touched it. No one approached the stage. No one made an offer. Once, Vanessa believed value was intrinsic. Now she discovered the truth. Value evaporates when reputation collapses. People don't buy liabilities. Her father stepped forward again. For the record, he said, voice tightening, this action is not punitive. It is corrective. The company must distance itself from behavior inconsistent with its mission. That was the final blow. He did not say my daughter. He said behavior. He didn't sever ties. He dissolved identity. Vanessa's hands trembled. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but words refused to form. Words had abandoned her long before people did. She had weaponized power without understanding its cost. She assumed humiliation affected only the target. She learned humiliation always travels back to its source. She thought her silence would be enough to contain the fallout. It wasn't. Silence without power is absence. Silence enforced is punishment. Silence earned is exile. Now she lived in the third category. Her friends did not comfort her. Her sponsors did not shield her. HR did not negotiate for her. The board did not inquire about her perspective. Her father did not protect her. The company she once strutted through as if it were her inheritance now dismantled her narrative piece by piece. Her humiliation was no longer an incident. It was inventory. As the board finalized the termination documents, the screen saved the last line in unforgettable typography, unsold not because people couldn't afford her possessions, because they refused the association. Assets do not sell when the name attached to them is radioactive. Someone whispered what everyone else was thinking. Everything she touched became a liability. The phrase traveled across the ballroom like a cold wind. Vanessa heard it. She didn't react. Her shock wasn't emotional, it was existential. Her world had been built on applause. In applause, she found identity. In applause, she found authority. In applause, she had mistaken performance for permanence. Now there was no applause left. And without applause, she had no self. Security escorted her from the ballroom, not forcibly, but formally. Dignity was the only thing she was allowed to carry out, and even that looked borrowed. Her heels clicked one last time across that marble floor. The same sound once associated with privilege now echoed like closure. As she reached the door, she stopped. She turned not toward her father, not toward the board, not toward the investors who once entertained her fantasies. She looked at the auction screen. Her name, her value, her emptiness. Then the doors closed behind her, and just like that, Vanessa Wexler left not as royalty, not as legacy, but as caution. The board did not announce her successor. They did not assign her office. They did not mourn her absence. They simply erased her presence. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes, justice is just a name no one raises a paddle for. The morning after the gala felt strangely quiet, as though the building itself was trying to forget what it had witnessed. People walked through hallways with careful footsteps, avoiding eye contact, behaving as if speaking too loudly might resurrect ghosts. It wasn't grief that lingered, it was realization. The company had finally confronted a truth everyone had sensed, but no one wanted to name. Power only exists when competence sustains it. Vanity collapses on contact with accountability. I returned to my office expecting paperwork, questions, perhaps even suspicion. Instead, I found respect waiting for me in silence. Employees who once dismissed me as the quiet technician now nodded with the humility of people who finally understood the difference between authority and access. They had watched me navigate humiliation, sabotage, and spectacle without raising my voice. That terrified them far more than anger ever could. Later that afternoon, a message arrived from the boardroom. Not a request. A summons. This time, though, the tone had shifted. They weren't calling me to answer accusations or provide evidence. They wanted to offer something. When I walked in, the atmosphere was markedly different from the day Vanessa faced her reckoning. There was no tension, no hostility, no storm brewing beneath polite conversation. Instead, I saw calculation, the kind executives show when they've realized the value of something they nearly threw away. The chairman spoke first, clearing his throat as if preparing for a speech he never expected to give. We would like you to consider stepping into the role recently vacated. There was no need to mention Vanessa by name. Titles no longer clung to her. Her position had become a ghost, visible only because the board wanted someone to replace it. I let the word settle. The offer wasn't flattering. It was revealing. They didn't want me because they admired me. They wanted me because the infrastructure they depended on had reminded them that systems don't respect reputation, they respect those who understand them. For a brief moment, I considered it. A corner office, a title embossed on business cards, a salary that could silence doubt. But then I pictured the throne they were offering, still warm from the arrogance that once sat upon it. It wasn't a promotion. It was a burial mound disguised as opportunity. I smiled politely. No, you could hear it, the sound of assumptions collapsing. Executives don't expect rejection. They assume ambition is universal, that everyone wants the same spotlight, the same applause, the same intoxicating relevance. They didn't understand that there exists a different kind of power, one that doesn't require applause. The CEO blinked, as though my refusal disrupted the architecture of reality. May I ask why, he said. Because I don't build on ashes, I replied. And I don't inherit ruins. The chairman leaned back, studying me not with irritation, but curiosity. They thought revenge was my motivation. They thought exposing Vanessa was my retaliation. They didn't realize I never fought her. I simply let the system speak. Revenge requires emotion. Documentation requires patience. I had chosen the second path long before she ever chose me as her humiliation target. After declining the promotion, I expected dismissal or distance. Instead, something else happened, something no one anticipated. Word spread quietly through the investor circles. Not about Vanessa. Not about the board. About me. Clients didn't want the company. They wanted the person who understood how the company stayed alive. 3 proposals arrived within a week. Not requests for resumes. Offers. Each began with the same sentence, though phrased differently. We need someone who sees what others ignore. These weren't small businesses. They were firms Vanessa once tried to impress, the same investors she attempted to seduce with fabricated metrics. They didn't admire her ambition. They admired the person who decoded her fantasy in real time. The irony wasn't lost on me. Vanessa had tried selling me off like an accessory in a circus auction. Now, people were willing to pay premiums for my insight, the very insight she mocked. I didn't start big. That's the mistake people make when they get their first taste of vindication. They assume the universe owes them scale. I rented a modest workspace with peeling paint and terrible parking, furnished it with 2 chairs and a desk that looked ashamed of its age. There was no reception area, no golden logo, no elevator pitch. I didn't need theatrics. My value wasn't decoration, it was clarity. My consultancy launched without announcement. The first client stepped inside as though entering a confessional booth. He didn't shake hands. He didn't flatter. He sat, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Tell me what no one else will say." That was my business model. Silence monetized. Truth refined. Expertise weaponized without malice. The second client came the following week, a woman with a talent for skepticism and eyes trained by disappointment. She didn't ask whether I was interested. She asked how soon I could begin. People trusted me not because I promised solutions, but because I never promised comfort. Comfort is cheap. Clarity is expensive. The third client arrived unexpectedly, an investor from the gala. He didn't mention Vanessa's humiliation. He didn't reference the night the illusion died. He merely handed me a folder thick enough to break a wrist. "I need someone who can see through the story and find the structure," he said. That sentence became the cornerstone of my career. In less than a year, the consultancy expanded. Not by marketing, not by advertising, by referral. Truth doesn't need billboards. It finds its own corridors. Meanwhile, the company I left behind struggled publicly. Press releases tried to erase Vanessa without acknowledging her existence. Leadership restructured departments whose blueprints she contaminated. Partners demanded reassurances. Clients scrutinized contracts more aggressively. The board learned the most painful business lesson a corporation can endure. You can fix systems. You cannot unsee truth. And truth had fingerprints. They weren't hers. They were mine. I never gloated. I never issued statements. I never commented on her scandal. People expected grand declarations, victory laps, triumphant speeches about justice. Silence did more damage. Silence made people fill the gaps with their own conclusions. Silence became reputation. I did not build a career on vengeance. I built it on observation, on understanding that power doesn't belong to the loudest voice, but to the quiet one who watches, stores, remembers, and waits. Vanessa mistook humiliation for dominance. She believed that turning a person into entertainment was equal to eliminating them. What she never understood is that humiliation doesn't end when laughter does. It begins where laughter loses breath. She tried selling me once, but I didn't become inventory. I became valuation. Clients didn't hire me because I retaliated. They hired me because I recognized the architecture of lies, because I didn't confuse data with decoration, ambition with execution, or inheritance with competence. I sold one thing: truth. Truth without anger. Truth without noise. Truth without theater. And the market, no matter how corrupt it becomes, always pays premium for truth. Not because truth is noble, but because it is profitable. The final irony of Vanessa's downfall wasn't her termination, or the silence that swallowed her name, or even the auction where no one raised a paddle. It was this: she believed she controlled my value the night she auctioned me. She believed she had reduced me. She believed the spotlight was her weapon. She never realized it was her mirror. She sold me once. I sold the truth. She inflated numbers. I validated reality. She built illusions. I built a ledger. One of us became disposable. The other became indispensable. And that is the engineer's quiet triumph. Revenge wasn't necessary. The system handled that. All I did was step aside and let reality collect its invoice. And as every marketplace eventually learns, truth never goes on clearance.